Oh, you're muted, Mark.
There we go. Okay, unmuted now. And we're back with another episode of Rise Up with Mark Mixon. Hoping everyone can hear me now. How are you, Adam?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I am doing well. You know, work has kicked back up to more than full time suddenly, and trying to get my legs back under me, get used to the over full-time sprint that will be the next, I don't know, well, the semester anyway. Has work sped up for you over there?
Oh yeah, it started about a week ago, and yeah, we got a lot going on, but like you said, it's just it's always a little bit of shock because you go from the slower parts of the summer to all of a sudden everything's happening at once. So
All of a sudden, everything at once. Yeah, no, and trying to get ready for classes to start. And we had a lot of budget freezes, which stopped work throughout the summer. And now that we're back, like all the faculty and and the executives and the management, they're all like, they desperately want everything done at the beginning of next week.
Yep.
And it's like it's too late for that. The time, if you wanted everything done,
Yep.
the time to do it was in the summer when you kept telling me, stop, don't have your people work, don't spend any money, don't do anything. Well,
Yeah, there has to be consequences to that or they never learn. But that's the thing about I know with faculty, from my experience, they're like spoiled children. They're so used to getting what they want when they want it that when you tell them no, they start throwing little fits. So.
Yeah, I'm not I don't interact with faculty enough, luckily, to have to even be able to form such an opinion.
That's good.
I do my best to keep everyone happy, but
I think mostly it's the tenured faculty because adjuncts know better. You know, just happy to have the work.
So we are, oh yeah, doing the interwebs thing. That's what this is really about, is the whole self promotion stuff. So yeah, follow us, like and subscribe, rate the podcast highly. If you're this is our first live stream with a guest, and I'll introduce them shortly, but if you're listening live, go ahead and hit that like button. Give us a boost and a promotion. If you want to watch us, this is a video podcast. We do, release it on all the regular podcast platforms, but if you want to watch on video, all of our episodes will eventually be on Rumble. Many of our episodes, I don't know if many episodes will be on YouTube or not. Sometimes our content is not YouTube friendly, but you can also get all of our episodes as well as exclusive content by joining our Patreon. Follow us on the Twitter, RiseUpWMark. And yeah, do the likey, subscribey. Help boost us and push our podcast wide and far. We would appreciate it. There, likey, subscribey, done. All the self-promotion.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about, you may recall, I don't know, back in the spring, we had Ramona from Save Section 9 out in New York City come on out to talk about public housing. And they had some opinions about social housing, which is apparently a new-ish trend. So today, and we've got certainly one we've passed in Seattle. We passed a social housing initiative a year or two ago, and we are still in the process of trying to get social housing going here. And so I thought I would bring on one of the board members of House Our Neighbors, which was the organization that sort of spearheaded the initiative and the signature gathering campaign to get that initiative passed. And there is I think the last, well, we'll find out. So I'm bringing a board member from House Our Neighbors on to talk with us about social housing, about how it's going in Seattle, and about how we can make housing more affordable sort of in general. You know that I do a lot of work with my unhoused neighbors. And, so this is an issue that's pretty important to me, to make sure that we have a city and a society where people can expect to have a roof over their head. um, so yeah, let's go ahead and roll our little intro music, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Jeff Paul, board member of House Our Neighbors.
Awesome. We'll be right back.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. Oh, dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof.
Okay, Jeff, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm gonna, sort of hop right in, but no, I'm not gonna hop right in. Before we get started, let's hear a little bit about you. Like, what is your background? How did you get involved with this effort to house our neighbors here in Seattle?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me here. House Our Neighbors is an org that's been around since about 2021. I got involved in the beginning when it was a coalition of groups that were coming together to push back against Charter Amendment 29. If you remember that whole spiel here in Seattle, basically it was called Compassion Seattle. That's what most people heard it as. It was an amendment to our city charter, and it was like flowered up as this amendment that was going to help with getting shelter and stuff for people. But mostly it was actually just a mandate to sweep folks living outside from parks, which was the huge concern coming out of 2020. And we came together against it in the coalition of House Our Neighbors. I'm a part of an organization called Stop the Sweeps as well. And we joined into that coalition to kind of fight against Compassion Seattle, and we were successful and got it removed because it was illegal. And then we started having some discussions. Well, if we don't like this, what do we want solutions to look like? After many discussions and lots of research, we decided that we were going to push a social housing initiative. And then we started doing that, and we've had a lot of success.
Yes.
Interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit. I volunteer with Stop the Sweeps, although I don't do direct sweep support with them, but I do community hours down in Pioneer Square with some regularity. So talk to me a little bit about. I'm intrigued by buffering. For everyone out there, my brain is buffering. Give me a second. Intrigued by, that statement. Like we said, well, this is not what we want. So what do we want it to look like? You triggered a couple of things there. First of all, Compassionate Seattle, really rings with me like the We Heart Seattle, which
Exactly. Yeah, it's all the same ilk.
Right. These conservative Republicans who pretend that they are compassionate, caregiving people who want to make Seattle better by making sure that the most desperate people are punished, and we'll maybe get into those people a bit, but I'm very impressed that you as a group, as a coalition of people coming together, trying to prevent sweeps, prevent our unhoused neighbors from being tortured and criminalized, took that next step. Like I feel like a lot of activist groups, a lot of people that I have in the past seen complaining / protesting against stuff, don't make that next step. Don't make that step of forming an actual organization, of doing the research, of potentially writing bills and laws. So can you talk to me a little bit about that, about how that decision went down and what that process was like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. I do think that there's often a lot of we're against these things, and I think us as a movement have a harder time being like, and we support these things. Um, so it was a lot of discussion. I think that it felt pretty kind of inevitable that we would do it. We had such a great kind of group of housing activists that came together that have been in this fight for a long time. Stop the Sleeps is just one of many organizations. Real Change was obviously a huge player. Be Seattle tenants organizations, housing organizations. You might be familiar with the Stay Housed, Stay Healthy coalition. A lot of those folks came and joined the transit riders unions. So a lot of really, really smart people who have been doing work for a long time were gathered together at a retreat where we had this discussion. And I think we all just were like, we know that the leadership of Seattle does not have a meaningful plan to get us out of this crisis that we've been staring down the barrel of and experiencing for, at its like current escalated state of homelessness, like over a decade. But in terms of just like rising housing affordability, decades, right? There's
Mhm.
no long-term plan to get us out of this. It's only ever going to be band-aids at best, right?
At best.
And we want to kind of put forward a more transformative vision and create a new discussion about how can we actually get ourselves out of this kind of housing unaffordability trap that people just kind of accept as inevitable as part of this like growing city with this big tech boom and this insane wealth inequality. Um, and as we were kind of figuring out how we were going to do that, we learned a lot more about what social housing is, how it's been successfully implemented around the world, and in some places in Canada and the US. And the more we learned about it, the more we kind of like looked at our landscape of housing and what was missing in our housing landscape, the more we decided that this was the move that we needed to make in order to really push the envelope of that conversation and kind of like break us out of this like neoliberal cycle of saying like we're doomed to only tinker around the edges of making things better and actually not meaningfully get at the root of the problems.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, so for people who are listening who don't know what social housing is, can you maybe give us a primer on what does that word phrase mean? Social housing. What is it exactly that social housing brings to the table?
Yeah. So social housing as a term is borrowed from a lot of different places, but it's very widespread in different places in Europe and a couple other countries around the world, like Singapore, some places in Uruguay, and some other spots. But the general idea of social housing is it is public housing. It's like publicly run and operated housing that exists for the public good. But the reason we use the term social housing as opposed to public housing is because of kind of the way that public housing has existed in the U.S. for its entire history of us administering public housing in the U.S. as being something that is only for the poorest people in our society. Social housing, on the other hand, is meant to be a public good that is similar to our other infrastructure, our roads, social security, things of this nature that is available to most people who live in the city. It is something that is meant to be infrastructure that supports the working class to be able to get something that everyone needs, which is affordable shelter and affordable housing. So the key difference I would say between like social housing and public housing is that it is really meant to be widely available to not just the poorest in our society, but it's meant to be available to all working people, right? So we said in our initiative 135 that it would be available for folks making up to 120% of the area median income. And that's really important for two reasons. Well, a number of reasons. But one of the reasons we think that's like the right way to go, and we think that's so important, even though, of course, we know we need to focus on housing for people who are really struggling. Um, One is that just simply the financing of social housing versus public housing and low income housing. When you have these kind of like cross class and cross income communities, you can have people who are making a bit more paying into social housing who can make it affordable for people who are making less without nearly as much public subsidy having to be put into the system to try to keep it afloat, right? Which makes it less like sort of like vulnerable to conservative governments coming in power and slashing budgets,
Mm.
or breaks in the economy where all of a sudden the bottom falls out of the economy and people are struggling and austerity is kicked in and all these sorts of things. So by having that sort of like cross subsidization built into the sort of economic um, plan, the portfolio of social housing, it means a more stable way of providing housing to lots of people, and on scale can also provide a lot of housing to people who are struggling the most. Um, And we've seen this successfully implemented in other places, and I can go into that a bit more. But that's kind of like one of the main tenements of social housing, is that it's available to everybody. It's a public good, and that allows for long-term stability in the project of making sure that a city is an affordable place for working people to be able to live and thrive.
Great. That sounds sensible. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I would note, like, I wish I had listened to our episode on Save Section 9.
Yeah, I'm really
Because
curious about it.
it's been a while since I've listened to it, but I was very, I was very impressed with and learned a lot about how public housing, originally was trying to make things very affordable and give the most poor, but also European immigrants primarily, a leg up and a way to get ahead in society. And once Black and brown people began using it to get themselves ahead, we began to see the defunding and demonization of social housing and public housing, and the sort of correlation of it with crime. And so having this sort of safety belt, so to speak, of hey, well, just because a different government comes in place, we can't necessarily pull the funding out. That seems very smart. At the same time, one of the things that I didn't know about the Section 9 housing, and a lot of my knowledge about it's probably very New York City focused, because that's where the organizer I spoke with was from, but had a lot of very social programs, right? It had childcare, it had ways to help people get jobs. It had, their rents really locked into a percentage of their incomes, so that regardless of how little you made, you still could afford your rent. And those things seemed like huge benefits to society and huge benefits to the communities that were living in those projects. So do we have some of those sort of elements inherent in social housing, the child care, the job assistance, et cetera? Is that part of the program with social housing as well?
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. So I think you're spot on. I think those are incredibly important pieces. Just a quick side note: when I'm in housing circles and people in Seattle are advocating for more housing, I talk sometimes about how there's a faction of people who have translated the housing first movement into a housing only movement. Which is
Mm,
more or less like just throw them in housing and then that's all we need to do. We actually don't need to do anything else. And I think that that is misguided. I think people do need support and assistance. They need housing. Get them in housing, and then I think we need those social programs in place to be able to help support folks. I unfortunately know a lot of people who have gotten inside, still struggled with trauma, all the things that had them on the street, and then they were pretty quickly back outside. So I
right.
think without like a good program to help support people and help get them on their feet, access to social programs, childcare, legal support if they've got things that they've got to worry about. Um, that's not going to be a successful program. So I fully agree, and I should hope that social housing will do that. That was very much the vision that we put out when we created the social housing developer with I-135. We did. I want to be very clear, also to start up front. House Our Neighbors is not the social housing developer, right? So there's a board that is the social housing developer. I am not on it. I am House Our Neighbors. We are an advocacy group. We are 501c4 and a C3. Um, I would love for them to go in that direction. We put a lot into the initiative that said they should do that sort of stuff, but it is ultimately their decision. And I think that they will. I think particularly childcare is something that we talk about a lot. So I think there's a deep desire to have childcare. I'm an educator in an elementary school. This is something that I know that we care about. We talk a lot about how we're not doing enough for families in this city, and the social housing developer can help with that. Um, um, and when it comes to income, you're saying like, in this section 9, they're making sure that people are only paying a percentage of their income. That's how social housing would function as well. No one in social housing will pay more than 30% of their income on rent, regardless if it goes up or if it goes down, which is a really, really important piece. And I'm not sure. I'm curious to know how this Section 9 works in New York. But in most, HUD run and subsidized housing, there is a cap on how much you can make
Hmm.
when you're in these public housing units. A lot of times it's 30% of the area median income or 50%, maybe up to 80, but it's mostly in that 30 to 50%. So if you make above that, you get kicked out. We call it a benefits cliff. Um,
Mm.
which is really unfortunate because it kind of disincentivizes people from trying to better their life, right? Because you've got to make this massive jump of going from subsidized rent when you're making 30% of the area median income, which in Seattle is like 33K a year, to all of a sudden you've got to jump to market price. When you just get a raise, probably not like more than a couple dollars above that, right? And then all of a sudden you're paying double, triple what you were paying in rent. People aren't going to do that. People just aren't having that level of economic mobility where they're making enough in a salary increase to justify that. So a lot of people stay working, sub, you know, you know, they're underemployed if they are employed, or they just stay living in this situation, which isn't good for them and it isn't good for us. Like these people, I know a lot of folks, they want to be able to move forward in their life, but they're just kind of stuck in this situation. Social housing tries to break away from that because we say, look, there is no top. You could come in making 30%, 40% AMI, and you could work your way up, live in the same unit for 15 years, move your way up a company. If you've got the economic mobility potential, you could be making 100% AMI. You're still only paying 30% of your income on rent. And not only does that help you, but it also helps the social housing developer because 30% of your income is now more money. So it's going into it. It's helping us subsidize other people's rent. It's helping us build new buildings so that we can bring more people in, get more and more of the market brought into social housing's like rent restricted hands essentially, and building out this project of providing housing for lots and lots of working people in Seattle.
Excellent. Yeah, I personally need to do more research on Section 9 as well. It seems to me, and my take in that previous episode was that as a society, we've moved away from the Section 9 into Section 8. And again, I don't know a ton about it, but based on my previous conversation, I felt like Section 8 was much more about extracting public dollars and funneling them to private developers and landlords,
Yeah.
etc.
Oh, I would love to get into that a little bit if we have time.
Yeah, I think we do because I'm really curious about how these two concepts of public housing and social housing can play together. I really hate when people pit solutions against each other as opposed to considering things multiple tools in our tool bag, right? Like there is no single answer that's going to fix social ills, right? We need to have a multi-pronged approach, and we need to do everything we can. So please, let's talk about, we've got a Seattle Housing Authority, and I think they would be the ones that would administer Section 9 if they were willing. And I don't know that it's like been repealed as law. I feel like cities that don't use it just choose not to. So can you talk to me about, yeah, let's talk about what the current tools that we are in theory using, the Section 8 Seattle Housing Authority. Talk to me about how that intersects with this concept.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for saying that. I think that multi-pronged approach is so important, and so much of unfortunately what we find ourselves in as How's Our Neighbors is being pitted into these conversations where we are being kind of uh, pitted against people who we see as our allies, right? We're being pitted against the Seattle Housing Authority. We're being pitted against these nonprofit housing providers. And this is not at all what we want, right? We firmly believe that all of these are incredibly important tools that are doing things that social housing will not be doing, right? It is really, really important that we continue to invest in permanent supportive housing for people who are really, really struggling and need to pay pretty much nothing for a considerable amount of time as they get their lives back together. That will always be important, and even in places like Vienna, which has like some of the most built out social housing programs where 60% of their residents live in social housing. um, Even those places have housing first housing options that exist separate from social housing to help people stabilize before they move into social housing. So we'll always need that. And I think it's really, really important to be thinking about, how can our different solutions be working together. And so for here in Seattle, social housing's goal is to uh, not fight against these low income housing providers. It's to take private market housing off of the private market and bring it into public hands
Hmm.
to help to provide a lower rental cost to lots and lots of Seattleites over time. And on a long enough timeline, many studies show that if social housing penetrates the private market enough and it pulls enough of the housing stock in a city into it, it has a cooling effect on rents across the entire city. If you hit like 20% of the housing market or things like that, 20, 25%, you start to see like a market cooling effect because there's a public option and all of a sudden private developers have to compete with it. They start not jacking up their prices as much, right? So one of the huge benefits in like Vienna, like I said, 60% of the people live in social housing. Even the 40% who live in private market, their rents are comparable because they have to compete with the public developer that's offering such cheap rents, right? Most people in Vienna are paying like 20, 18% of their income on rent, so that's our goal. Our goal is not to come after the nonprofits, right? So the tools that do exist, to get to your question, the Seattle Housing Authority has a really important role, but it and nonprofit housing providers are kind of our two biggest prongs for providing affordable housing to folks in Seattle. They make up less than 5% of the housing stock of Seattle. Like we're talking somewhere around 3%. I can't remember the exact number, but it's definitely less than 5% by a considerable amount. And the Seattle Housing Authority, have you all heard of the Faircloth Amendment? Do you know?
I don't remember 100% what it was, but I do remember running across, like, it prevents, let's see if how good my brain is. It prevents any additional building of public housing beyond like whatever it was during the Clinton administration sometime, right? Like
1999.
99. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh,
So
yay.
hey, yeah. uh, Excellent work. Yeah, it's this like wild legislation that was passed during this era where everyone loved to hate on public housing,
Hmm.
which is an era we're still in. Let's be real. And they decided, we're going to make sure, it was like this compromise. I can't remember the exact political fight, but it was supposedly this compromise to get money to help retrofit some housing. And this conservative dude who's like a pig farmer from like a red state said, hey, I'm going to introduce this amendment that says we'll give you this money, but that means you can't build anymore. So that's where we're at right now. Seattle Housing Authority is bound by the Faircloth Amendment. It's a HUD. It's our HUD administered housing here, so they cannot expand their stock beyond 1999 levels, right?
Interesting.
Which is horrible. They would say, I would say, and it would be challenging for them to do so additionally because HUD funding, which is the main thing that has driven our investment in public housing, right? Most of it comes from federal dollars, has been slashed. It was slashed under Reagan and it has just never recovered. It was slashed by like 70 some percent. It was several hundred billion dollars investment down to like, $80 billion or something like that. Huge cut. And that has been just like that has had such a ripple effect. There's this really great organization that I'm also a part of called RAP, Western Regional Advocacy Project. They've got a really great presentation on like basically the trajectory of funding with public housing, and you can just see this chart that they have where it's been going up and up and up, and then under the Reagan administration, it just plummets and it's fully never recovered. So not only are they prevented from exceeding the housing stock that they had in 1999, they're also not being supported to do the work. And because they have a model that says we will always prioritize people who have an inability to like pay meaningful amounts of rent, which makes a lot of sense. We've got to prioritize these folks. They will always need lots of government subsidies to make that work, which we should do. We absolutely should be putting public funds. What else are we putting public funds towards if not housing? It's one of the most important things for someone to live a dignified life. But while that's not happening because there is no political will at a federal level to make that kind of investment in our public housing stocks, um, there's not even political will to overturn the Faircloth amendment. Like AOC tried to do it and got like no support. So that's kind of like where Seattle Housing Authority is kind of stuck in this position. And they do great work. They provide a much needed resource for a lot of people, and I hope that they will be able to continue to do it. I hope they expand their capacity. I hope the federal government gets their act together. But for now, they're kind of pinched into this spot. So if we move away from them and then we look at the other main actor in low income housing, we're talking about nonprofit housing, which also does amazing work. Uh, but they're also doing the best they can with largely local funds,
Hmm.
trying to solve this issue, right? Sometimes we'll get injections, like after the pandemic and the COVID Relief Act, there's a huge flood of federal dollars that came in and went to some of these housing programs to buy up buildings and expand our nonprofit housing stock, which is great and should continue. Um, but now we're back in the federal funds have depleted, and so we're trying to build out a housing system with state, county, and city funds, and there's oftentimes just not enough money there, especially when you've got this awful city council that we currently have, that is just looking at how can we implement the worst austerity measures we can in this upcoming city budget. They're talking about, they're talking about slashing the entire tiny house program. They're talking about evicting hundreds of people from nonprofit housing because they're going to cut contracts. Like it's a real dire situation, and this is the situation that nonprofit housing providers find themselves in, where they're scrambling to, kind of like fight for scraps because the city just has not decided to get behind progressive revenue in a manner that's going to give them the funds that they need to meaningfully continue to not only invest in purchasing or building more buildings, but then also maintaining those buildings, dealing with operation costs. Like it's all investments. Housing is expensive, and you
Hmm.
have to have a good financing plan in order to make it pencil long term. And if you're constantly dealing with austerity governments, then you're constantly on shaky ground in terms of how much you can keep this program going. So um, this is just kind of where we see ourselves at. These two big systems that we have are unfortunately really beholden to this kind of political game. And as a result, it's just they're not able to meaningfully address the issue to the scale that's required, is kind of where we see it at. Even though they're doing incredible work and we should always support them, we should always vote for the housing levy, we should defend Jumpstart so that they have access to funds to be able to keep their programs going and expand their programs. And we should fight at a federal level to repeal the Faircloth Amendment and invest HUD dollars in it. We're also trying to say now, because we're in the political reality we're in, let's create this other path for us too by investing in the social housing developer, which maybe can break out of some of these political games by having a different financing model.
Excellent. Well, yeah, clearly that is important. I didn't realize, mostly I guess because I just didn't think about it deeply enough, that the Faircloth Amendment would apply city to city. I mean, it makes sense because the housing authorities are city-based entities. They're not federal. They're not statewide. They're city-based. So, but when I was talking with
City
people
or
in New
county.
York, say again,
City or county. Some of them
city
are
or
county.
county.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. But more about a municipality than an overreaching. And when I was talking with about the people in New York and about housing in Chicago, they're not even that concerned about Faircloth right now because they're in a situation where they have allowed the public housing to get into such disrepair that they could then legitimately tear them down and then get rid of public housing. So in those cities, you could Faircloth, that they have lots of public housing they could, in theory, build if they had the political will for it, and still be below their threshold, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't realize. Thank you for the reminder of that. It's a daunting task. It feels like to me. I'm gonna process some of that for a few moments. Talk to me instead for a minute about that effort to get social housing and the social, what was it called, the social housing board, is that
The social housing developer.
developer, the social housing developer? Yeah, talk to me about the effort to get initiative 135 sort of through the gates.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so a few years back, We decided we were going to go for social housing. We looked at the political landscape and we were like, we don't think the city's going to do this. Even when we had a more progressive city council, we were like, this isn't coming from the council. There's too much hesitancy to try to implement new things. So we're going to go through a citizens initiative route. So we decided to run Initiative 135, which was basically created the social housing developer, right? It just created the container, and it's a publicly run developer. It's a PDA, Public Development Authority, the same sort of political entity that runs like Pike Place Market and a couple other. We've got a few PDAs that have specific tasks, and we created another PDA, and this PDA's task is to create the social housing throughout the city. So we were like, we're going to do it. And we had a ton of support right out the gates. I think people in this city are really, really desperate for new solutions. They see that what we've been doing has not been working. And as soon as we introduced this concept to the public, there was just kind of this immediate, like, we're in. We had hundreds of people start. It was an entirely volunteer run effort. I think we had like 2 or 3 paid signature gatherers, but for the most part we had to gather, the threshold was we needed 26,500 signatures in order to just get on the ballot, which is a lot of signatures. It
Mhm.
means hundreds and hundreds of hours of going around and pestering people for their signatures. And it was almost entirely volunteer driven, getting all those signatures. We had hundreds of people, tons of orgs partnering with us to join in our signature gathering efforts, progressive orgs, unions, just neighborhood associations, all sorts of folks came together to say, we want to see this happen. This is a positive vision we can get behind when things seem dire and rough. We've got Bruce Harrell in office, and he's just sweeping people left and right. We want a positive vision, and people really got behind it. And we had a massively successful campaign that got. We got the signatures we needed. We got like 29,000 signatures. We got on the February ballot in 2023, which is a special election. And when that election came, we won by 14% voter margin. So 57% of Seattleites voted in favor, 43% voted against, which is more popular than any politician who's currently in office. And at that time, the social housing developer was created. And it's been fun trying to navigate the bureaucracy of getting it up and running. But that's kind of where we're at now.
Great. I'm gonna step back for a second because you've said a few things that I want the things that I in my organizing work try to really focus on with especially with new organizers, that it's one thing to try to get together and generate some power as a group of activists, but once you've done that, if you want to really truly make change, someone has to step up and create an organization to preserve the power that you've generated, to allow it to live longer than perhaps the ability of that first group of organizers to come in. And Adam and I did an episode early on about, like, what is the way to successful change? Is it electoralism or is it activism and direct action? And the answer we landed on is both. Like, you got to generate the power, but then you got to get people in office who are going to pass the laws. You've got to have people there who are willing to support the changes you've made. So kudos to all of y'all for taking what you needed to do and doing that difficult and not very sexy work of digging into the laws and writing the stuff, and following through, right? That follow through is something that we on the broad left really need to do so much more of. Super appreciate you all and the work you've done with that. Okay, sorry, just had to call that out really quick because I think it's so important, and I'm so glad you guys have taken those steps. And I wish that more people who complain and are angry about the way things are would be willing to take that step up and become more legitimate and do the things we need to do to make the changes more permanent, or our power that we generate more permanent.
Here.
Okay, so Initiative 135 created the social house, the public development authority, right? But it didn't really, did it create the funding, or it
No,
did not? And so that's why we needed I-137. Yeah.
correct. Hmm.
Okay, so talk to me about this most recent effort that I know I signed it, but talk to me about this most recent effort.
Yeah. Yeah, so in Washington State, we have under our Constitution what's called like a single issue clause. I think that's the name for it, something like that. That basically says these voter initiatives they can only do one thing at a time. So we were not able to put on one initiative, creating this thing and funding it in the same initiative. So when we were pushing for people to sign I-135, we were pretty clear. Hey, we're gonna have to come back, and figure out how we can fund this thing. Obviously, the the structure itself has a lot of like self-financing built into it, but every venture is going to need capital to get up off the ground, and having a consistent funding source just means it can do its job better. So we're like, we got to get this some money, so we're going to come back. And they were kind of like two ways that we were going to come back. If we had had a very successful progressive race in this most recent city council election, we had been talking with candidates, and a lot of the progressive candidates were on board with just creating the funding stream for it. So had we gotten those folks in office, um, we might not have been here. We might not have needed to do this initiative. So, shout out to sometimes you have to do electoralism.
Mhm.
Um, but that's not what happened. The conservative bloc had a clean sweep, minus Tammy Morales, in the city council race.
It
Although
was a rough election last year.
it was a rough election. And then even the person who Tammy Morales beat got appointed to city council anyway.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Tanya Wu.
But hopefully not for long.
Yeah, she's out of here. The 38% third incumbent, embarrassing for her.
Yeah.
Great for Alexis. Alexis, big supporter of social housing. I-137 has endorsed our campaign, which we love to see. Um, but yeah, so because we had the election results we were like, all right, it's another initiative. So in February, we launched Initiative 137. And it is an excess compensation payroll tax,
Okay.
which is essentially says we set this kind of arbitrary threshold of excess compensation at if you make in total compensation, which includes like stock options and all these different things. If someone at a company is on the payroll making more than $1 million a year in total benefits, then there is oh my god, a marginal tax of 5%. So over that first $1 million, we don't touch the first million, but over the first $1 million, everything after that is taxed at 5%. And it's a payroll expense tax, so it's a tax on the company, not on the individual.
Okay.
Doesn't come from their check, because we're not allowed to do that because we live in a state where income taxes are constitutionally prohibited. Um, and so this was the mechanism that we could use. It uses a similar framework to the Jumpstart tax, the Amazon tax, and but like a little different. So it's going after really the highest income earners in our city and the companies that pay them. That tax, our legal experts and folks that we talked with estimated to bring in about 50 million bucks a year in revenue, and that would go directly to the social housing developer. So that's essentially what I-137 says. It says we tax these wealthy companies, and we give the money to the social housing developer so that it can do its mission. And it's been an even more successful campaign in terms of public support than I-135. We had the same threshold for signatures we needed to get, which is like 26,000, and we turned in almost 40,000. Tons of support. I gathered signatures for both campaigns, and I would say when I was like, "Hey, do you want to tax companies who have people who are making $1 million a year, and use that to buy affordable housing for everybody?" Everyone was like, "Oh my god, why is it a million? Why is it 5%? Make it low or make it more money." Was pretty much the response I got from 90% of people I talked to. So wildly popular. We crushed our goal. Um, and we will be on the February ballot once again because the city council is up to some shenanigans. But we fully expect to be successful, and when we get to the February ballot, we expect it to pass because it's remarkably popular.
Yeah, let's talk about the shenanigans and how/why we're on the February ballot. I mean, I got to say, our corporate funded, uh, placed, purchased current city council. I mean, it's unprecedented, right? Like it's not that they said, "Oh, well, we've got this initiative now," and so like what they would normally do, and what I feel like there was an open letter I remember reading that a group of nonprofit and whatever partners said, like, "Hey, sure, they've got some good ideas, but they're not responsible enough to control the money. So why don't you put in a separate, a competing initiative that gives the money to us instead?" And rather than even doing that, the city council just blocked the initiative getting on the ballot. Yeah, have I got that right?
Yeah, more or less, more or less. So the city council, the way the whole process works is once we turn in the signatures to the King County elections, they send it to the city clerk's office to verify. City clerk's office sends it to city council once we have a verified amount of signatures, and they're just supposed to take a procedural vote and it should be handled before any other business, according to our city charter. Um, that they take a procedural vote to put it on a ballot. Um, and on August 4th or 6th, they had a city council meeting, and it happened to be the day of the final deadline to get on the November ballot. They had a meeting where it was on the agenda to be discussed and put on a ballot. And after like an hour and a half of public comment of people saying, put I-137 on the November ballot or pass it, because they also could just pass it. They could not put
Hmm.
it on a ballot and they could just say, yep, we got it. Of course, they won't do that. So next best thing, put it on the November ballot so voters can vote on it right away, and we can start making this happen. After listening to like an hour and a half of public comment, um, they right away voted to take it off the agenda, and it passed 7-1 with one abstention. Um, Bob Kettle moved the motion, Dan Strauss seconded it, and everyone but Morales voted for it, and Kathy Moore, who abstained. Um, and by doing that, they guaranteed it would not be on the November ballot.
So supposed to be, per the city charter, a procedural vote to either enact the initiative or put it on the ballot.
Mhm.
And they instead voted to take it off the agenda. Are there legal actions? Do we have legal? Can we sue the city for violating the charter? Can we recall these sons of bitches for violating the charter, for closing down debate, for retreating to their offices like cowardly children who refuse to engage with the people that they're supposed to represent? We all know that they actually represent wealthy corporations, and that's who put them. I was at a side note, like I here in West Seattle in District 1, I was at a debate between uh, Lauren and Saga. Is it Lauren? No, I don't even remember anymore.
Um,
See
oh,
how
I know who
bad
you're
I am.
talking about.
Um,
I forget her name too.
but it was yeah, it's Morin. I'm not gonna remember. I should look it up. I should have been prepared. But I was like, I thought it was a done deal. Like Sokka had no supporters in the crowd. Dude was this terrible debate bro. I felt like it was a done deal, and suddenly Sokka gets
Huge injection of cash.
huge injection of cash, huge fundraising. Like, dude didn't. So we know that our city council represents these financial interests at this point. But do we have recourse? Can we sue these people? Can we? What's the next step for this?
Yeah, great question. Um, so we've talked with our lawyers. Tammy Morales on the stand when this vote was taken, she said we might be in violation of our city charter, our requirement to handle this before other business and put it forward. As we talked with lawyers, it seems like they really do. They get 45 days to decide what they're going to do, and that time extends until like September 16th. I want to say is the deadline of that. And while they've completely broken from previous city council's interpretations of the city charter that say, you know, do this and it's the first thing, blah 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 blah, the legal justification for a recall, because there's only three reasons why a city council, you have to like qualify for one of three reasons to initiate a recall campaign, and one would be a violation of the city charter. It's like doesn't know if there's like the legal justification for initiating that recall based on this, because they do have those 45 days to act. So while they've broken with precedent and tradition, our lawyer is not sure that they've violated the city charter,
Hmm.
which is this unfortunate like legal gray area that we're in. Um, but what we do have is so what I'll say is that it is very frustrating that they engaged in this anti-democratic bullshit, quite frankly. I hope
Mm-hmm.
that's okay to say.
I'm
Um,
sure.
I hope that's okay to say because it's some bullshit.
It is.
Um, but for us, we won on the February ballot in 2023. We're gonna win on the February ballot in 2025. We're not scared. Even they can do whatever they want. Clearly, they're scared. We know that we have the public support. So while it's frustrating that we're not going to get the benefit of being on a presidential ballot where you have massive voter turnout, we're still going to win in February. The concern for us is if they put that amendment forward that you're talking about, where which they could have done. You know, when we were in 2022, there was that initiative about like doing ranked choice voting and like
Mm-hmm.
voting procedures. City council announced at the next meeting, or I think they called a special meeting to announce their plan. I could be getting the slight details wrong, so forgive me. Um, but very quickly, they announced publicly as a city council that they were planning to put an alternative forward. And then the next business session where they could, either a special one or the next city council meeting, they basically publicly, in front of the public, uh, figured out what their alternative was going to be, and they put that forward in a pretty quick turnaround, pretty quick succession. Conversely, this city council is all behind closed doors. They're trying to like, go to their supporters and put out little push polls saying like, what do you think about this sort of amendment? Could we do this sort of alternative? But then when pressed about it publicly, they're like, oh, we don't know, no idea what we're going to do. Pretty search me. We have vague legal questions about this. That's why we took it off the agenda. Um, but we know that's not the case. Kathy Moore was trying to put out something where instead of doing, her alternative would be, instead of having this payroll tax that goes to the social housing developer, she said, let's increase the housing levy by 20% and give that money to the same people who already get the housing levy. The housing levy is a property tax. It's pretty regressive. Even though we need it, we should always support it. Property taxes impact people, impact working people, and they're not very popular. So the fact that she's coming around with that just demonstrates who she is, whose interests she's serving. These corporations that don't want to pay their fair share in taxes went to her and were like, "Hey, make this go away." And that's the sort of stuff that they're up to. But the unfortunate thing is, if they put out an amendment um, that basically pits money going to the social housing developer against money going to these low income nonprofit housing developers, that's what we are frustrated by, because back to your original point, we don't want to be in this conversation where we're saying who's most deserving of this funding.
Right.
Do we want to invest in social housing, which is going to support low income workers, some folks who are like the lowest income, but it's also going to support just some of the workers that make our city function, janitors, nurses, teachers, custodians, and baristas. All these different people can qualify to live in this housing, and all these people are being squeezed by ever rising rents. So we don't want to be in that game. So what we are prepared to do legally is, there's rules about what they can meaningfully put forward in an alternative. It has to like stay within certain parameters of the original initiative. They can't just say like alternative to do whatever else we want to do. So our lawyers are pretty sure that if they put forward the one that Kathy Moore was like kind of like testing, polling to her people, that would not be legal, and we're prepared to sue if that is put forward. We're also prepared to sue if they don't meet their requirement within 45 days. So we have a couple of different ways. We're also prepared to say, hey, some of these folks, can these city council members be voting on this issue, because it actually might go against their financial interests. Some of these folks are business owners who might have to like, have family members who are impacted by this tax, or they have like a stake in a business that might have to pay some of this tax. Should they actually be allowed to weigh in on this? So these are kind of the legal challenges that we're currently looking at. Um, Unfortunately, at this time, we're not sure that we have a clear path towards a recall, though of course we would love to see it. And if other people interpret the laws differently and want to reach out to us about it, we would love to hear from them.
Excellent. So yes, if you are out there and you
Yeah,
have
if
some
you're a lawyer,
expertise,
hit me up.
yeah, please, because it is, I anti-democratic, undemocratic, whatever you want to like. I am shocked, not shocked. I'm not shocked by it. I wish I was shocked by it. I am infuriated, I think is a better word, by the way our city council keeps shutting down a discussion, refusing to listen to their constituents, ejecting people from the council chambers, running and hiding in their rooms to pass things that they know are terribly unpopular. But they are beholden to the wealthy people that put them in office as opposed to the actual voters of this city. Okay, so to get on the ballot in February, you don't have to do a thing. That's just going to happen no matter what. Is that a true statement?
It better. It had better. By September 16th. We better know if we're on a ballot, Otherwise, yeah, lawsuits, baby.
Yeah.
Because that's just like a gross dereliction of duty, if that's the right word. Yeah. So our interpretation of the law is if they don't place us on a ballot by September 16th, that we will just automatically be placed on the next ballot, which would be the February ballot. There is a slight concern that they could put us on a different ballot. They could create a different special election for us. That seems really unlikely. Like we're really not even entertaining that as a possibility, but they kind of technically could do that and like either punt it down even further or like put us on something that's even different from February to further decrease voter turnout for this issue.
Did they do that once during one of the attempts to recall Shama?
Yes, they did. Yes.
Yeah.
So the recall Sawant was a special election different from any others, right? So that was the only thing that people were voting on. Right. So that's kind of the precedent where like they could do something slimy like that if they want to. I think that we would also consider a legal challenge there because it's like why, it seems like they're engaging in essentially like voter disenfranchisement if they're trying to do that. And I think that we could have a case for that, but I don't think they'll do that. I think the most likely scenario is they're going to buy out all their time and they're going to try to come up with some alternative and they're going to put that on the February ballot. And then we're going to beat that alternative and we're going to pass social housing funding because it's immensely popular.
Immensely popular. Great. I want to step back for people who don't know. There was a time, and I don't know exactly when. I had to look up the law before this episode to get the verbiage right, and I'm not going to quote it. I'm not going to bother going. But so Washington state law has a clause now that prevents rent control, except the exception is for properties that are publicly owned, managed, or in partnership. There's a public-private or a low-income provision there as well. But I want to talk about the publicly owned or managed because it's a public development authority. This would be publicly managed, right? Publicly owned to a degree. Yeah. Like I'm trying to figure out
fully
publicly owned. So
in perpetuity, cannot be sold off to the private market.
Being publicly owned does not make it public housing.
It is public housing. We call it social housing because we want to distinguish from like what people think of when they think of public housing. But this is publicly owned. It's housing that is owned and managed by publicly accountable entities.
I mean, I'm trying to parse in my head what the difference is, where that line is for that Faircloth Amendment thing. Like
that's about HUD managed housing, and we are not HUD managed housing.
HUD managed housing. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Yes. So, because I've long felt like, why don't we, the first time I read that law, I felt like, why don't we just then have the city own more properties? Why can't we pass a law that requires, when you're building these giant fucking apartment towers, that 15% of them be managed by the city, and then the city rents them out to the amount that they want to rent them out at? We have, for people who
Instead,
don't
we do
live,
something way worse than that. Please continue. Sorry.
well, I was just, for people who don't live in Seattle, like over the last 20 years, the number of enormous glass apartment towers downtown has skyrocketed, and they are enormously expensive. And I feel like they're not bursting at the seams. Let me put it that way. I don't know what the vacancy rate is for those things, but like, I feel like there are avenues we could take that would begin to leverage some of those properties that exist, that would begin to leverage allowing these developers to build these huge things, and give far more public house. I shouldn't say, publicly owned housing, publicly controlled housing. We should have a lot more avenues to combat this problem, which has been a huge problem. Like I remember coming back to Seattle after a time away, and being a little shocked at how many tents there were on sidewalks, and just it was not the housing crisis of the 80s anymore, right? This was a whole new thing, and it is a policy choice. This is a choice we are making. The amount of the millions, the tens of millions, I don't think I'm exaggerating, of dollars that we spend just criminalizing the poor and sweeping these people out, and the six-figure salaries we pay to people to just destroy the belongings of our most disenfranchised people. Just redistributing that, like, to services, could do a huge amount of good.
My
And I
blood
want to,
pressure is spiking as we talk about this. It's like
no, I
huge,
really,
huge for me. Yeah.
yeah, it's enormously infuriating, and it's a choice that has been made at both the city and the county and the state level. And so I want to call out the real estate lobby. Like, I remember I used to work for the State Department of Transportation when I was a young man, and worked at the headquarters on Capitol campus. And it was a lovely campus there in Olympia with all these buildings, and there were no new buildings being built, and every state agency was now building, or developers rather, were building buildings that were then going to be rented to the state, because at some point the real estate lobby convinced the legislature that it was better to rent than to buy. And I'm sure that all of our state legislature members, they're all renters, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because it's more efficient. So
Of
they
course.
said, as they passed this law, it's better to rent. That's why none of them want to own homes. I mean, the hypocrisy of the lawmakers is just astounding. So, as someone who's participated in actual, real successful organizing efforts that have taken that step to building an organization, to building successful coalitions that have gotten things on the ballot, that now can afford lawyers to help fight these battles in court, how do we call out that hypocrisy? How do we change this narrative that we are all trapped in?
Yeah, I think this is like monumentally important. And I obviously am one person. I don't have all the answers. But I will share some of my thoughts on this issue. I think that what we are currently engaged in right now is um, an effort to break the general public, including our lawmakers and all of these people, out of this neoliberal logic that is so deep seated, that we've been living in for decades, that has just become, the accepted status quo. And we have got to work to break people out of that thinking, because they've been brought up thinking that this stuff is common sense. I was brought up thinking a lot of this stuff is common sense. Public housing bad, all of these different things. And we're now going through a moment I think as a society, as movements, where we're kind of in this kind of clash of ideologies and kind of ways of trying to engage with the world and passing policy and how should different entities act. And I think we need to continue to press that envelope to inform the public, inform lawmakers, inform all different sorts of like institutional players of what alternatives can really look like. So for this example, it's absolutely absurd that we've got, one, we're spending tons of public money, renting spaces when we could own spaces. Everyone knows that's a bad choice, right? Yet it's just a way to privatize public goods and
Hmm.
for people to make money off of the back of the taxpayers, right? And we've got to get ourselves out of that trap, you know. But it's not popular because you're taking on like Tanya Wu's. She put out a little flyer, and they have to disclose their top 5 donors. All 5 of her top 5 donors are real estate
Of
agencies,
course.
realtors, people invested in real estate. These people have immense amounts of power and wealth, and they control so much of the public discourse. So you're organizing against the most powerful people when you're trying to make these changes. So we have to be able to do the same. We have to be able to raise the funds. We have to be able to pull folks together to be able to combat some of this misinformation and some of this stuff. But we're never going to have the same amount of funds. So we also have to have big ground games. So another organization that I'm involved in, Stop the Sweeps, created a coalition with a whole bunch of other kind of like-minded homeless advocacy groups. It's called the Services Not Sweeps Coalition,
Hmm.
and we advocate for exactly what you said. Don't spend money on sweeps. In 2023, we allocated in the city budget $38 million for encampment sweeps. They spent that we can find. We've done PDA requests and stuff. We worked with like some reporters, and they found $27 million spent in 2023 to sweep. Guess how many times? How many sweeps? Which is clearing someone from a space. How many do you think happened in 2023? There's
I
365 days in a year.
Right. Now I would guess over 1,000. I would guess that we are sweeping multiple times a day. It's
Yeah,
happening so much now.
yeah. In 2023, there were over 2,800 sweeps.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So that's like 7 a day. They're just constantly kicking people around, and we're just burning cash to do it. And we're going into a year when we have a city deficit, a budget deficit of like $250 million or some shit like that. This council has demonstrated they're not willing to raise progressive revenue, so it's a slash and burn budget. Um,
Well, let's add more
and
cops and give them
Let's
hiring
add more
bonuses.
cops. They in the supplemental budget they added like 17 positions to the sweep team. Like they're just doubling down on incarceration, punitive measures, not supporting people, slashing social safety nets, and making sure that we can lock people up. So we've got to fight against that. One of the things that Services Not Sweeps is planning on doing is engaging in this budget conversation, using it as a way to spread our message to the public, because I think a lot of the public doesn't know what sweeps are. They don't know how much money is being spent. They don't know how many sweeps are happening. They don't know how ineffective and useless they are. So there's a lot of just like a public game. It's really frustrating because I wish we had the resources to do what the real estate lobby does and buy politicians, but we don't.
Mhm.
We're never going to have that on our side. We can get some resources, but just not to the same extent. So it's really we have to be engaged in kind of this long haul. We are shifting awareness, public consciousness, building kind of a new mentality around how we engage with these things. So we're going to be tabling at farmers markets. We're going to be doing presentations at universities. We're just going to be pushing this message as much as we can, using the budget conversations to highlight these issues, using elections to highlight these issues. We've got to run candidates who will run on these issues. Like I'm so glad that Alexis is running and she's working. She's met with Services Not Sweeps. She's met with How's Our Neighbors. She's willing to put these issues as part of her platform so we can start talking about them. So I think we just have to use a lot of different avenues and strategies to raise awareness around these issues and basically shine light on the problem, because I think that's the only way we can with the way that our current government runs, we can address some of these problems long term. I'm glad that Sean Scott is running at the state
Mhm.
level and bringing a lot of these issues to Olympia, so we can talk about state funding. And I think we just kind of have to. I think we have to do all these different things to try to just change the way we see these issues. And I'd love to hear some of the thoughts that y'all have had around this as well.
Boy, my thoughts are often angry thoughts.
So real. So real.
Yeah, no, I feel really strongly that I don't have a way. How do we change it? I'm not sure. I know that what's happening right now isn't working. I end my episodes with a call to action, and it is the same call to action, quite frankly, that we must organize. We must, this is not a spectator sport, and there is no other choice. I'm doing the call to action I hear early. Maybe I'll do a second one later. There's not a way to opt out of this system, right? Either you build power with others, or you allow other people to have power over you. There is not a third option, and you cannot just abdicate and disengage and not participate. You are participating whether you want to or not. So either you like what's happening right now and you expressly support it, or you work for something different. So, we had Alexis on the show. We actually had all three of the progressive challengers. We had Sonatina and Tariq and Alexis all on the show. Alexis, I think, is scheduled to come back the first week of October. I personally will be volunteering with her campaign now, because we absolutely must have Tanya Wu out of that office. We can't, we're stuck with a lot of these city council members, all, the 7 regional districts. We're stuck with them for a few years, right? But we can make sure that we have
1 year for Sarah Nelson.
1 year for Sarah Nelson.
And for
Yes,
Bruce Harrell.
absolutely. And
if anyone want to run for mayor, hit me up.
Okay, so yes, for real, like, Bruce Harrell has to go. The Harrell horror show must end. Sarah Nelson has got to go. She's a cowardly tool of the corporate industry. So yes, that'll be a good call to action. I don't want to end quite yet, but we are at we've been going a little over an hour, so it is time to start considering the wrap up. So yeah, said jokingly, but not a joke. We need someone to run for mayor. We need someone to combat the corporate tool that is Bruce Harrell. We need someone to get Sarah Nelson the fuck out of that office. And those are the options that we have for our city for the next couple of years, right? It's just those two. Alexis, I was so heartened. Quite frankly, this primary was heartening in a lot of ways. Melissa Chandri,
Oh my God.
right? Like,
Amazing.
getting on the top 2 against Adam Smith was great.
I'll be volunteering with her campaign for sure.
Having Sean Scott make it through for which legislative is it? 43rd legislative district. Yeah, it's not my district, so it's easy to forget which one. But Sean, we should invite him on the show also. That it would be a great addition to Olympia.
He's so sharp. He's such a good person to talk with.
I followed him on the socials for years now. So yeah, my plan, any plan I've got, is that if you're out there, if you dislike what's happening, please get involved. Find whichever issue you find burns you the most, gets your blood pressure rising, causes you the most angst in your life. I guarantee there is a group of people like Jeff here who are working on that issue right now. Give money if you've got it. Give your time. Time, from my perspective, is worth so much more than the money. Like, if you think your time is worth $25, $50 an hour, like, giving time is worth the money. Like, we need people knocking the doors. We need people manning the tables. We need people doing the phone banking and the text banking, and willing to learn how to have organizing conversations and just talk with their friends and their neighbors and their coworkers and their families. Like this, you are not immune to propaganda, and the corporate entities have all the money to spew all the propaganda into your brain all the time. And we need to break free of the neoliberal idea that it is the job of government to intervene in markets on behalf of corporations, as opposed to intervene in markets on behalf of the people. Like, society should serve us, the people. Like, that's the whole point. Our government should be for the social good. So that is my idea. And and one of the reasons I wanted to start this show was to try to highlight that there is a way to do this. We can, in fact, make a difference. If we couldn't beat these people, they would not spend so much of their time and money trying to beat us down and flood the airwaves with propaganda and combat us on they know we outnumber them. We outnumber them so much that if we can get organized, if we can beat their effort to divide us, we can win this. So we've got to get involved. Okay, so
Could I
please,
just make an
please,
extra plug there?
please.
Yeah, everything you're saying, 1000%, building up our skills to have conversations that are inherently political and politicizing, I think is so important. And figuring out the avenues and the vehicles where those are going to have the most impact is also really important. So I think everyone, it's a silly thing, but organizing 101, figure out what your network is and where you have access to power in
Mhm.
organizations that have influence, and figure out your role in politicizing those organizations and moving them more and more on these issues. And I'm going to make a plug for labor unions. I am active in my labor union in terms of having working class organizations that can raise the kind of funds needed to do big campaigns to challenge these people. There's really no alternative to labor unions. They're the ones who can spend big on behalf of the working class. And labor unions have struggled in this country for decades now. They've not been immune to the propaganda. They've not been immune to the neoliberal era that we're in. And it's really important that we join in with this movement to, kind of revitalize our labor struggle and use unions as political vehicles, not only to improve our working conditions, which is like, so important. Um, but also see them as vehicles for addressing political change. Unions have a long history of being involved in, militant fights for important progressive policy. A lot of the things that we take for granted came out of like incredible labor struggles. I mean, the teachers union. There's like a really amazing example in another member of a union, Jesse Hagopian. He wrote this book. It's about like social justice teacher unions and their labor struggle in Chicago in like the 1930s, I think. um, uh, a bunch of banks just and wealthy corporations just stopped paying their taxes, and as a result the school district in Chicago like laid off like 2,000 educators because they couldn't afford it because they didn't have money coming in. So the teachers got together, and I would never advocate for violence, but they went and they stormed the banks and they just trashed them, and they said, pay your taxes or we will go to every single one of your banks and we will like make it so that you cannot do business in this town. 2,000 educators who were part of the union got together, made that happen. Guess what? They paid their taxes, they rehired the educators. So
Mm.
unions can be a vehicle of immense political struggle, and they can build resources and build power for like, real like important working class politics. And I just think that can't be overstated. I need anyone who's in a union to get involved in kind of the political fight within your union too, because we really need to recognize that that's an immense power. Particularly here in Seattle, we had the third highest unionization rate of any city in the country, which is very cool. And we need to be leveraging that to push for what we want, what works for working people. And I'm very glad that How's Our Neighbors, I-135 and I-137 have had strong support from labor unions, and we continue to work lockstep with labor unions here in Seattle to push that issue and recognize that labor unions have a really important role to play in our political fights.
Okay. All right. I feel called out just a little bit. I'm going to, because, on my Twitter, on my personal Twitter, like I have a logo I made for, I self-identify as a proud union thug. I think it's in one of the taglines about the show, political organizer, union thug, blah, 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 whatever. And it's been, I was working on a campaign, and it's been 6-8 months since I've been to a union meeting, so I feel called out. I got a January meeting coming up here, the 1st of September. Gotta go back to my.
What's your union? Is it AFT?
No, I'm IATSE Local 15.
Oh wait, that's right. I saw that on your website.
Yeah. We are the union behind entertainment. We have, it's relatively large international. I don't know the number. I'm going to say 125,000 members internationally, but a lot of those are Hollywood based. But we have over 1,000 people in our hiring hall in Seattle, and probably 500-600 members here in Seattle. I ought to. We had a hiring. I find I just need a little more self-discipline, I suppose. I'm easy to incite. I remember sitting last fall, after Biden broke the railroad worker strike, and I introduced a resolution on the floor of my union, calling it out and calling out our international for endorsing Biden so early when he broke a strike. and I had some brother on the floor of the meeting literally say, well, some strikes need to be broken. I felt like my head was going to explode. It just really. So I'm going to take your words as a call to action for me personally. Going to make sure I go back to my meeting. I'm going to start charting out people in my union and start working on not being incited, but rather having some of those conversations and talking to. We got a new president of the local, and spend some time talking with Stephen and maybe get myself appointed to one of the labor councils. I'm
going to be a delegate to MLK Labor Council starting this year. I'm just about to get appointed, so
excellent.
I'll see you there.
Bravo. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm taking.
Also,
please.
Shout out to your union. IATSE Local 15 was the first labor union to endorse services, not sweeps, in our call for. It was after the All-Star game, where a lot of IATSE
Right.
folks are at the baseball arena there, saw all the sweeps that were happening ahead of the All-Star game, saw us agitating around the issue. One of them got in touch with me. I was like, hey, that was super messed up. What can we do? And put forward a resolution and got it passed. And IATSE Local 15 was the first to endorse our campaign to ban winter sweeps and to redirect redirect funds towards services instead. So this is what I mean. It's possible. And I'm excited to work with you. And I think one thing I do just want to say, I know we're short on time, so cut me off whenever. It is really hard to be in liberal union spaces, like neoliberal union spaces. My union is definitely not immune from this. I have had such a hard time beating my head up against the wall within our union. It's been years and years of pushing our union to be better. And one thing that's really helped is we created a caucus within our union. And we affiliate with a national caucus, the union, the United Caucus of Rank and File Educators, CORE. And having those kind of folks to come back to be like, that was fucked up, wasn't it? Wasn't that horrible? But how are we going to organize well to counteract it? So that you don't feel alone in those spaces, I think is just absolutely crucial. And reaching across to other labor unions, folks who are engaged in that kind of struggle. I was a part of another organization called Labor for Black Lives, and we're doing a lot around police accountability. And being able to introduce stuff, have it fail, and then folks come back to our group and we can kind of support each other and have that organization fall back on. To your point, that having that organization that can come together and support each other, think about how we can move the political conversation forward is just so important. So because that's real. The frustration of working within our current union spaces is so real.
And part of it is because I feel like these people ought to already agree. These people ought to be allies. Like, you're a union member. You have the union to thank for so much. And yet here you are, advocating that other people don't deserve what it drives me insane. Yeah, I'm gonna. And I've
lost years of my life. Years of my life. I used to have the hair's going and everything as a result,
I'm part of rank and file, the national rank and file crew, we call it, the caucus of rank and file entertainment workers. I've not been very active. I was working on a congressional campaign and I had to step up to manage the campaign around the holidays, and it took all of my time. essentially, right? But yeah, I'm going to finish this episode by recognizing your call to action about labor unions and about getting involved. And I am personally going to commit to attend my meetings again, though they are interminably long and we must have hours of reports before we can do any new business. And starting to chart my union out on behalf of crew, and I'll start attending crew meetings again. There's so much to do. And, I'm still a working person and have so little time. And,
this is why we need everybody involved.
That is why we need everybody involved. So yes, if you are out there, please get involved, find your issue, work in your union. If you've got one, start a union. If you don't, and reach out to people who are doing the work, because they need your help desperately. I want to ask a thing, and then we'll finish. Quick hot thoughts. Because you said if you want to run for mayor, reach out to me. So hot thoughts from you. Are there names on the horizon that you don't even have to share them here? Are there names on the horizon that you can think of to replace either Harold or Nelson?
I have people who I would love to see do it. But I have not gotten commitments from any of them. I think people are really reluctant to step into that space, particularly the mayor's race, because we haven't had a progressive mayor in the city in I don't know how long. They have so much power. There's so much corporate backed support for a corporatist candidate that it's really hard to push through. And Harold, even though he sucks, he's charismatic and a lot of people like him,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a hard fight. I've heard talk. I don't know if it's going to happen. I've heard people trying to push Morales to run for that position. My experience talking with her is I think that she's too tired. Understandably, she's banging her head against the wall in city council every day.
Right.
But I think she'd be a great candidate. And I think there's a couple other folks who also could consider that. But I think that that's the only name I've heard talked about publicly for that mayoral seat. And I've heard a lot
Okay.
of people talk about Sarah Nelson, and also Ann Davison is up to be challenged too.
No, please.
Our MAGA city attorney, and I do know someone who's planning on challenging her. I'll leave that to them to announce their candidacy.
Of course.
But that we do have a challenger for that. They're not an amazing progressive, but they're better than her. Yeah, so the seats are very much still open. Anyone who's listening could run, or if you know people who you think could run a campaign and win, please encourage them to do so.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jeff. I really have enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate you being here. I found it educational, insightful, and at times infuriating, but not you, obviously, just the situation we find ourselves in. Real glad to have met you today and make this connection, and let's keep in touch, because
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you both so much for having me. This has been a very cathartic conversation. So it's always great to come into spaces where people, I don't know, are like-minded and kind of get it and are as mad as we are, So
Amen.
yeah, really appreciate that. Really appreciate you inviting us on. Excited to continue to follow the show and stay connected.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Adam. Thank you as always for being here, although I didn't give you much chance to talk, but
I could have stepped in. I would say 170,000 plus members of IATSE, and the Section 9 episode we did was episode 14, if anybody wants to go back and listen to that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for putting that out there. If you're out there listening, appreciate you. Go ahead, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Rise Up.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.